Hello, welcome to the Tying Bench. My name is Mark Van Patten, and I'd like to welcome you to my fly tying room. We're going to tie a fairly simple pattern today that's a really effective fish catcher, especially when you got some midges coming off. And it's called the Griffith Gnat. Been around a long time, and it really only has two materials involved in tying the fly. We're going to be using Peacock Earl, real great fish catching material there, and a grizzly neck hackle. It is a dry fly, so we're using a neck. For our thread, I'm just going to be using a black thread. I'm particularly fond of this 14-aught, so I'm going to use it, but a 6-aught or an 8-aught is fine. I think I'd go with an 8-aught before I would a 6-aught, because generally you want to tie this pretty small. It is a midge pattern. Some people think it represents a cluster of midges, and I think maybe at times it can, depending on the size you tie it. But traditionally, if you tie it in an 18 or smaller, I think it just does a great job of imitating a midge stranded on the water. I've looked at photographs of midges on the water from underneath the fish's view, and what you see are some dimples, multiple dimples from appendages and body parts. And when you look at the Griffith Gnat laying on the water, you see the exact same thing. So it could be either one or a cluster. For our hook, we're using a Mustad R30 in a size, in this case, 16. And again, I would tie it in anywhere from a 16 all the way down to a 22. Okay, let's get our thread started here. Need to pull this around a little bit and run it back to the bend. And we're going to start with our Peacock Earl. I like to I'll use about 2 strands. You don't want to put any more than that. You don't want too thick a body on this thing. It's a small fly. And just a couple of strands of nice iridescent green Peacock Earl. Last material on is usually first material turned. In this case, I'm putting on the grizzly hackle second, and it's going to be the last thing turned, but that's okay. Let's see here. I'm going to match this up to the size. Oh, got lucky. Pulled a size 16 right off the bat. Okay. Trim off the excess. Do a little comb. Now it's going to be really important that I pull off. I'm going to let you see what I'm doing here. Pull off and have a bare stem right above my comb. My comb is just to help lock in the stem so it doesn't pull out too easy. The bare stem is going to allow this thing to turn around the hook shank without hackles pointing straight back. It's going to keep them flared the way they're supposed to. Now we're going to grab our Peacock Earl and go ahead and start working our way forward with it. Just like so. Just nice side-by-side wraps, building up that great iridescent green, buggy looking body. Till we get to right there where our thread is waiting on us. Go behind it a couple of times, and then go in front of it a couple of times, and we're there. We can cut that off. It's not going anywhere. There we go. Now grab our hackle pliers, and we're going to palmer this. Now you notice that when I pulled off that little bit of stem, when I start my first wraps, all the hackle stays on top. It doesn't stick out the back, creating a tail, which we don't want on our Griffith Gnat. Midges don't have tails. Just kind of palmer it through that peacock, creating basically what we're building here is a really tiny woolly worm without a tail. And a couple wraps behind, and a couple wraps in front. Take our serrated edge and just kind of cut that off. Sweep everybody back, throw a couple wraps on to create a little bit of a head. And we're going to put some tying wax on. I like using the tying wax. You think about this. Look how small this is. If you tried to get a dollop of head cement in that little tiny spot there. Let's just get a bodkin here. Well, we'll use this guy right here. in this little tiny spot right here, chances are pretty good you're either going to hit your hook eye and get glue or cement in there, or you're going to hit your hackles or your peacock and gum them all up, making them stiff and not have that lifelike action. This takes the place of that. It's a wax made with pine rosin, beeswax, and castor oil. The pine rosin helps create enough friction that when you whip finish with it, with the thread that's got it on it, it's not going to pull out from under itself. Basically what you're doing is you're wrapping over the top of itself when you create a whip finish. When you draw that down, you can really feel that friction. And it's going to stay there. And I think this stuff is great in that it really does replace the need for head cement. Not only that, you don't have the smell that you have with head cements. There's no aroma to this. It has no smell. Look at there. Nice, great looking midge fly. You can put a little dressing on it. I would help it to stay up longer. Now, when you fish this guy, first time you catch a fish, it's going to be slimed up, and you're going to think, okay, I need to tie another one. You really don't. There's all kinds of devices out there now that you can use for taking the slime and water out of the fly. Just use your floating crystals or whatever you've got to absorb the water out. Squish it down, get the water out of it. There's a little pad you can buy to do the same, and then throw a little more dressing on it, and you're ready to go again. If you do get some sharp tooth scratching across that peacock and it starts to come unwound, time to time a new one. There is a way to eliminate that, or at least somewhat, and that is to wrap your peacock around your thread as you bring it forward, and that helps strengthen it some. But it also has a tendency to mat down that pretty green iridescence, so I generally don't mess with it. It takes so little time to tie these that it's worth it just to get the best look, and oh well if you have to tie in another one. When you fish it straight out and across from you, you need to get a drag-free float. If you don't mend that line, that current drags it and it starts to rip across the water and cut the little V's in the water, fish are not going to take it. A midge is so light and so tiny and so small, so minute, sitting on the surface of the water, it doesn't create a disturbance. So if your fly starts to drag and gets that little micro drag on the water surface, that is a disturbance the fish is going to see, and they're going to ignore your offering completely. They will not take your fly. So you want to make sure that when you cast out, the last second you throw the belly of that line upstream, allowing the fly to drift without a drag until the fly line passes it, and eventually the current takes it on down and creating drag, which time you pick it up, recast it, and represent it. Now, these guys are small. They're awfully hard to see. Here's the secret to catching fish and knowing when you got to take. You don't know when you got to take half the time. Don't worry about it. If you can't see the fly, you still know roughly where it's at. If you see a fish come up and take a fly off the surface in the general area where you think your fly might be, set your hook. What's it cost? Setting the hook is free. Doesn't cost a dime. Set it. If there's nothing there, pick up and cast again. If there's one on, hey, you didn't miss the fish. And it may be that fish you've been waiting for all day long. So, again, set the hook. Okay, well that's it for this fly. We're going to take off to Mark's tippets, and we'll be back in just a couple of minutes.